Rico led Caleb through the marble corridors of his estate, past oil paintings worth more than most men earned in a lifetime, beneath chandeliers that had once hung in Venetian palazzos. The boy's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, a sound that would have irritated Rico yesterday. Today, it barely registered. They entered Rico's private study, a room few were permitted to see. Dark wood paneling absorbed the morning light. Leather-bound books lined the walls, most unread, selected by a decorator for their spines. Rico poured himself a whiskey despite the early hour, then thought better of it and poured a glass of water for the boy instead. Caleb sat in a chair too large for him, his feet dangling above an antique Persian rug. Someone had cleaned his face, but his eyes still carried the weight of what he'd witnessed. Rico recognized that look. He'd seen it in mirrors after his own father's death decades ago. "Tell me what happened," Rico said, settling into the chair across from him. "From the beginning." The boy's hands twisted in his lap. Dad was scared. I'd never seen him scared before, but the last few weeks, he kept looking over his shoulder. He stopped letting me walk to school alone. He made me promise not to answer the door for anyone. Did he say what he was afraid of? Caleb shook his head. Not at first. But 3 days ago, a man came to our apartment. Dad sent me to my room, but I could hear them arguing. The man said Dad had one last job to do, that it would square things between them. Dad said no. He said he was out, that he'd paid his debts. The boy's voice cracked. The man said nobody gets out. Rico leaned forward. What did this man look like? I only saw him through the crack in my door. He was tall, thin, nervous. He kept checking his phone, looking at his watch. Caleb's eyes widened slightly. It was gold, the watch, shiny gold with a blue face. Something cold settled in Rico's chest. He knew that watch. He'd given it as a gift 5 years ago, a reward for faithful service. What else? Rico kept his voice gentle, but his mind was already racing. Did you hear a name? No, but Dad called him something after he left. He said... Caleb closed his eyes, remembering. He said, Messina thinks he can use me one more time. He doesn't know who he's dealing with. The name landed like a hammer blow. Sal Messina, not Benedetti. That had been the father's name. Messina. The sad-eyed accountant who'd risen through Rico's organization by being unremarkable, invisible. The man who'd requested transfer to the consigliere's office 7 months ago, right after Sal Benedetti's banishment. The man Rico had barely noticed, which was exactly how Messina preferred it. Jesus, Rico whispered. He stood and walked to the window overlooking his gardens. 3 gardeners were already at work, maintaining the geometric perfection of the hedges. Everything in its place. Everything controlled. Except it wasn't, was it? While he'd been performing his rituals, Messina had been moving pieces on a board Rico hadn't even known existed. What happened last night? Rico asked without turning. Caleb's voice was small. Dad waited until it was dark. He wrote something down. The details about your car, about the bomb. He made me memorize the address of your house, made me repeat it 20 times. Then he told me to hide in the bathroom. He said no matter what I heard, I had to stay quiet until morning. Then I had to run here and warn you. And you heard? The silence stretched long enough that Rico turned around. Caleb was staring at his hands, tears sliding down his cheeks again. 3 gunshots, the boy finally said. Dad didn't make any sound after that, but they stayed in the apartment for a long time. I could hear them looking for something. They never checked the bathroom. Rico crossed the room and knelt before the boy, meeting his eyes at the same level. Your father was a brave man. He saved my life, and he saved yours. That matters. Do you understand? That matters. Caleb nodded, but Rico could see the doubt. The boy was wondering why his father's bravery had ended with gunshots and a locked bathroom, why courage hadn't been enough. Rico understood that doubt intimately. He'd spent 40 years believing ritual was armor, that perfect repetition could ward off chaos. Sal Benedetti had known better. He'd known that in the end, only human choice mattered. The decision to send your son with a warning instead of running, to die protecting someone who'd cast you out rather than save yourself. Messina thinks I'm dead, Rico said, standing. That gives us time. Time for what? Rico looked at the boy, then at his own reflection in the darkened window. The man staring back looked older than he had that morning, the silver hair suddenly seeming less distinguished and more simply gray. Time to stop hiding behind superstition, Rico said quietly. Time to remember that this business runs on trust, not routine. Your father tried to tell me that. I didn't listen. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marco. Find Sal Messina. I don't care where he is or who's protecting him. I want him in front of me by tonight. He paused. And Marco? Be unpredictable about it. No patterns, no schedule, just results. When he hung up, Caleb was watching him with those old, sad eyes. Will you kill him? The boy asked. The nervous man with the gold watch? Rico considered lying, offering the comfort of ambiguity, but this child had earned the truth. Yes, he said. I will. Rico stood at the window long after Marco had left to hunt Messina, watching shadows lengthen across his garden. Something gnawed at him, a wrongness he couldn't articulate. Behind him, Caleb had fallen asleep in the oversized chair, exhausted by grief and adrenaline. The boy's chest rose and fell with the deep rhythm of childhood sleep, innocent and trusting in a way that made Rico's next thought feel like betrayal. But the thought came anyway, insistent and cold. He pulled out his phone and dialed Vincent Caruso, his tech specialist. The man answered on the first ring. Boss? The device on my car. What did the bomb squad find? A pause. They're still working on it. Should have a report in an hour. I don't have an hour. What's your read? Vincent hesitated. Rico could hear him breathing, weighing his words. Honestly? The placement is wrong. Explain. If I wanted to kill you with a bomb in that car, I'd wire it to the ignition or hide it under the chassis. Maybe the seat. Somewhere with maximum damage potential. Vincent's voice grew more confident as he worked through the logic. But the inside door handle? That's exposed. Visible if you know where to look. And the device itself is small. Too small for an effective explosive charge in a reinforced vehicle like yours. Rico's pulse quickened. What would it be instead? Could be a trigger for something else. Or... Vincent trailed off. Or what? Or it's not a bomb at all. Could be a tracker, an immobilizer, something that activates when you touch it, sends a signal, locks down the car's electronics. Vincent spoke faster now, warming to the theory. You pull the handle, the device activates, your car's computer system gets hit with a remote kill switch. Engine dies, doors lock, you're trapped inside. The room tilted slightly. Rico gripped the edge of his desk. A cage, he said quietly. Yeah, a very expensive, very visible cage. Rico's mind raced through implications like falling dominoes. If Vincent was right, and the logic was sound, then the device wasn't meant to kill him in his garage. It was meant to stop him somewhere else, somewhere public, somewhere the killing could be witnessed. The freeway, Rico said. He wants me on the freeway. Boss? But Rico had already hung up. He crossed to his wall safe, spinning the combination with practiced ease. Inside, among the cash and documents, sat a burner phone he kept for emergencies. He powered it on and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. 3 rings, then, Yeah? Tommy, it's Rico. I need to know who's been asking questions about my route to the airport. Tommy Valente ran security for half the legitimate businesses in the city and information for the other half. If someone had been researching Rico's movements, Tommy would know. Funny you should call, Tommy said. I got a query last week from one of Messina's guys. Wanted to know if your airport runs were still Tuesdays and Fridays. Wanted to know which freeway exits you preferred. You tell him? Boss, I told him what everyone knows. You're a creature of habit. Interstate 95, always the express lanes, always departing between 7 and 7:30 a.m. Tommy paused. Why? What's going on? Rico ignored the question. If you wanted to stage a public hit on someone driving that route, where would you do it? The line went silent for a long moment. When Tommy spoke again, his voice was careful. The Bridgewater overpass. It's elevated, exposed, no cover, traffic cameras on both ends but a blind spot in the middle where the city's been meaning to install new ones but hasn't gotten around to it. You stop a car there, you've got maybe 3 minutes before police response. 3 minutes is plenty. Rico, what the hell is happening? Messina put a device in my car, not a bomb, a kill switch. He wants me immobilized on that overpass. Rico walked back to the window, looking out at his perfect gardens, his controlled world. He wants everyone to see. He wants to send a message that even I'm not untouchable. Jesus, when? I'm supposed to fly to Chicago tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. departure. Rico checked his watch. He probably has people positioned already, waiting for me to follow my routine. So don't go. Change your schedule. Take a different route. It was the obvious answer, the safe answer. Rico could feel his old instincts screaming at him to retreat, to hide behind new rituals, new patterns. But Sal Benedetti's words echoed in his mind, delivered by a dead man through his son. The ritual isn't what keeps you safe. The people are. No, Rico said quietly. I'm going to give him exactly what he expects. That's insane. Maybe, but Messina thinks he knows me. He thinks I'm predictable. He's counting on my routines. Rico smiled without humor. Time to teach him the difference between pattern and plan. He ended the call and turned to find Caleb awake, watching him with those two old eyes. You're going to let them try to kill you? The boy asked. I'm going to let them think they can. Rico knelt beside the chair again. Your father understood something I'd forgotten. Predictability is only weakness if your enemy knows your true intentions. But if they think they know you, if they're certain of what you'll do, he met Caleb's gaze, then you're the one setting the trap. Will it work? Rico stood, his decision crystallizing. Tomorrow morning we find out. Outside, the sun was setting behind his mansion's western wing. In 18 hours he would drive his usual route at his usual time, following the pattern Messina expected. But this time, the ritual would be a weapon. This time, the prey was hunting back. Rico had sent for dinner, pasta carbonara for himself, chicken fingers for the boy, but neither of them had much appetite. They picked at their food in the study while the grandfather clock in the corner ticked toward 8 p.m. Caleb had been quiet for nearly an hour, staring at nothing, occasionally opening his mouth as if to speak, and then thinking better of it. Finally, he said, "Can I have some paper?" Rico gestured toward his desk. "Help yourself." The boy slid off his chair and approached the mahogany desk as if it were sacred ground. He selected a single sheet of Rico's personal stationery, cream-colored, monogrammed, and then, after a moment's hesitation, returned it and grabbed instead from the printer tray. Smart kid. Even at 10, he understood the politics of choosing the right kind of paper. "Do you have crayons?" Caleb asked. "Crayons? Or markers, colored pencils, anything like that?" Rico almost laughed. His study contained first editions and Cuban cigars, 18-year-old scotch and a handgun from World War II. But crayons had never made the inventory. He was about to say no when he remembered the waiting room outside, the one his grandchildren used on their rare visits. He sent Marco to investigate. The bodyguard returned 5 minutes later with a battered box of Crayola crayons, the 64 count with the built-in sharpener. Caleb's eyes lit up at the sight, the first genuine spark of life Rico had seen in him since the garage. The boy spread the paper on the coffee table and knelt before it. He selected a black crayon and began to draw with surprising confidence, his small hand moving in decisive strokes. Rico watched, fascinated despite himself. "Dad made me memorize everything," Caleb said as he drew. "The night before, after the nervous man left, he showed me pictures on his phone and made me look at them until I could see them with my eyes closed." The shape emerging on the paper was unmistakably a car, Rico's Mercedes, rendered in the crude but accurate geometry of childhood. Caleb drew the door handles with careful attention, marking the right rear handle with a red X. "This is where the device is," he said, tapping the X. "Dad said it would activate when you opened it from inside. He said it would shut down the car's computer and lock all the doors. Rico leaned forward. Your father told you this? He made me repeat it. He said I had to remember every detail because you'd need to know exactly what they planned. Caleb switched to a blue crayon and began drawing a series of rectangles around the car. And he showed me pictures of the place where they were going to do it. What place? Caleb didn't answer immediately. He was focused on his drawing, adding details with the intense concentration only children could muster. He drew what looked like a road beneath the car, then added guardrails on either side. Above the car, he sketched a simple sky with a yellow sun. Then, in the corner of the paper, he drew another rectangle. This one was larger than the others, boxier. He colored it gray and added 2 circles for wheels. There was a van, Caleb said quietly. Dad showed me a picture someone sent him. It was parked on the overpass right before the bridge part. He said they'd been there for 3 days, watching. Rico's blood went cold. A surveillance van? I guess. It was big and gray and had a company name on the side. But Dad said it was fake. Caleb picked up a green crayon and carefully wrote letters across the van. Metro cable. He made me memorize this too. He said if the van was still there, that meant they were still planning to do it. Let me see that. Rico took the paper, studying the child's crude map. The details were there. The overpass, the specific positioning of the van, even an arrow showing the direction of traffic flow. Caleb had marked an X on the roadway itself, presumably the kill zone where they'd planned to stop his car. Did your father say anything else about this van? How many people inside? What kind of weapons? Caleb shook his head. Just that it had been there for 3 days. He said professional killers don't camp out unless they're sure of their target. The boy looked up at Rico. He said they were sure of you. Rico stared at the drawing, this absurd crayon map that contained more actionable intelligence than any report his security team had produced. Messina had been watching the overpass, staging his equipment, waiting for Rico's predictable Tuesday morning drive to the airport. The surveillance van would coordinate the attack, probably jamming his phone signal, directing the shooters, ensuring no witnesses escaped. It was a solid plan. It would have worked perfectly. Marco appeared in the doorway. Boss, we've located Messina. He's holed up in a warehouse in Red Hook. We can move in whenever you're ready. No, Rico said, still studying the map. Not yet. Boss? Rico set the paper down carefully, as if it were a holy relic. How many men do we have who can handle precision work? Real specialists. Not the usual muscle. 6, maybe 7 if we pull in Tony from the docks. Get them. I want eyes on the Bridgewater overpass tonight. Find that gray van. I want to know who's inside, what they're carrying, and how they're planning to communicate. Rico looked at Marco. And I want the van intact. No one touches it until I give the word. Marco's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. You're going through with it. Messina thinks he's set a trap for a creature of habit. Rico smiled. Tomorrow morning, he'll learn what happens when the creature knows the trap is there. Caleb was watching him with those old eyes. My dad said you were the smartest man he ever met. He said that's why it hurt so much when you stopped trusting people and started trusting patterns instead. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Rico looked at this 10-year-old boy who'd lost his father to a conspiracy, who'd been forced to memorize murder plans and draw maps in crayon, and felt something shift inside him. Your father was right, Rico said quietly. About all of it. Outside, the city was settling into its evening rhythms. Somewhere out there, Messina was preparing for tomorrow's execution, confident in his knowledge of Rico's routines. Somewhere out there, men in a gray van were watching an empty overpass, waiting for dawn. Rico picked up the crayon drawing and studied it one more time. The crude lines and childish colors contained a truth he'd been blind to for decades. The most dangerous patterns were the ones you created yourself. Tomorrow, that would change. Rico stood alone in his study at midnight, staring at a business card he'd kept in his desk drawer for 3 years. The card was simple, white stock, black lettering, no embellishments. Lieutenant Sofia Herrera, Major Crimes Division, New York State Police. A phone number and email address, nothing more. She'd given it to him after a sit-down negotiated by federal mediators, one of those awkward meetings where law enforcement and organized crime pretended they could find common ground. Most of the cards Rico received at such gatherings went straight into the shredder. He'd kept hers, though he couldn't say exactly why. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him, not with the usual contempt or fear, but with something closer to weary recognition, as if they were two professionals trapped in the same tired dance. "You'll call me someday," she'd said as they were leaving. "When the cost of not calling becomes too high." He'd laughed at the time. Rico Antonelli didn't collaborate with state police. It was against every rule he'd built his life around, violated every code of the world he inhabited. Men who talked to cops ended up dead or in witness protection, which was just another kind of death. But then, he'd also believed his rituals would keep him safe, and that belief had nearly put him in a coffin. He dialed the number before he could reconsider. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice alert despite the hour. "Herrera." "Lieutenant, this is Rico Antonelli." A long pause. He heard her shift, could picture her sitting up in bed, instantly focused. "It's been a while, Mr. Antonelli. This line is recorded, you understand that?" "I understand. I need to meet with you. Tonight, if possible." "Are you surrendering yourself?" "No. I'm offering you Sal Messina on a platter, along with evidence of conspiracy to commit murder and 3 days of surveillance footage you'll find very interesting." Another pause, longer this time. "What's the catch?" "The catch is that tomorrow morning, Messina's people are planning to kill me on the Bridgewater overpass during my regular drive to the airport. I have the location, the method, and the exact timing. I'm proposing we use this information to catch him in the act." "You want to set yourself up as bait?" "I want to turn his trap into ours." Rico walked to the window, looking out at his gardens bathed in moonlight. "But I can't do it alone. My people are loyal, but they're not trained for this kind of precision operation. And if anything goes wrong, if Messina escapes, he'll disappear and try again in 6 months. I need this ended, tomorrow." He could hear her breathing, calculating. Sofia Herrera hadn't made lieutenant by being impulsive, and she certainly hadn't survived the state police bureaucracy by trusting mobsters. "Why should I believe you?" she finally asked. "Because I'm calling you at midnight on a recorded line, admitting to knowledge of a planned assassination and offering to cooperate in a sting operation, none of which I would do if I had literally any other option." "What changed? 3 years ago you wouldn't have touched this phone with a hazmat suit." Rico thought of Caleb sleeping upstairs, of Sal Benedetti dying to save a man who'd exiled him, of 40 years spent hiding behind superstition while calling it strength. "I got old," he said quietly. "And someone reminded me that patterns without purpose are just prisons." Herrera was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted, still professional, but with an edge of something that might have been respect. "Where do you want to meet?" "Neutral ground. The parking lot behind St. Anthony's Church on Mulberry Street. 1 hour. I'll need to bring my partner." "Fine, I'll bring one of mine." Rico hesitated. "Lieutenant, if you're planning to arrest me the moment I show up, just say so now. I'm too tired for games." "If I wanted to arrest you, Mr. Antonelli, I've had 3 years to do it. 1 hour. Come alone except for your one person. No weapons." She hung up. Rico stood holding the dead phone, feeling like he'd just stepped off a cliff. Marco appeared in the doorway, drawn by some sixth sense that told him when his boss was doing something monumentally stupid. "You called the cops," Marco said. It wasn't a question. "I called a cop, singular. There's a difference. The guys aren't going to like this, boss. It breaks every rule. The rules got Sal Benedetti killed and almost got me blown up in my own garage." Rico turned to face his bodyguard. "New rule, Marco. Survival trumps tradition." "And if Herrera double-crosses you? If this is a setup?" Rico slipped the phone into his pocket and reached for his jacket. "Then I die breaking my own rules instead of following them. Somehow, that feels like progress." They drove to St. Anthony's in silence, using a secondary vehicle and a route Rico hadn't traveled in years. Breaking patterns. The church parking lot was empty except for a dark sedan parked beneath a broken streetlight. Sofia Herrera stood beside it, hands visible, wearing jeans and a state police windbreaker. A younger man in similar attire stood a few feet behind her, the partner presumably. Rico approached with Marco at his side, both of them acutely aware they were violating decades of protocol. "Lieutenant. Mr. Antonelli." She studied him in the dim light. "You look like hell. It's been a difficult 18 hours. "I imagine so. Let's skip the pleasantries. What exactly are you proposing?" Rico pulled out Caleb's crayon map, now laminated and annotated with details his people had gathered. He spread it on the hood of Herrera's sedan. "Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., I'm going to drive my regular route to the airport. My car will be equipped with the device Messina's people planted, a remote kill switch that will lock me inside at this point on the Bridgewater overpass." He tapped the X Caleb had drawn. "There's a gray surveillance van already positioned here, probably containing a 3-man team with communication equipment and weapons. When my car stops, they'll move in for the kill." Herrera examined the map, her expression unreadable. "And you want state police positioned to intercept?" "I want you to let it play out until the last possible moment. Let them activate the device. Let them approach the car. Get everything on record, conspiracy, attempted murder, the works. Then move in." "You're asking me to let you sit in a locked car while armed men approach with intent to kill. That's insane." "That's evidence," Rico corrected. "Everything else is speculation. This way you get them on video, in the act, with no room for reasonable doubt." The younger officer spoke up. "Lieutenant, this is—" "I know what it is, Davis." Herrera kept her eyes on Rico. "What's in this for you? Why not just have your people handle Messina?" "Because if I do it my way, he's dead, and I'm looking at a murder investigation. If we do it your way, he's in a cell, his organization collapses, and I walk away clean. Plus," Rico hesitated, "a 10-year-old boy drew this map because his father died trying to save my life. I owe it to both of them to do this right." Herrera studied him for a long moment, then looked at the crayon drawing again. 7 a.m., Bridgewater overpass. "You'll do it?" "I'll have sharpshooters positioned on both ends of the bridge and a tactical team ready to move." "But Mr. Antonelli, if anything about this smells like a setup, if I think for 1 second you're playing me, I will burn your entire organization to the ground. Are we clear?" "Crystal." She folded the map and handed it back. "Then I guess we're partners, for tomorrow at least." Rico took the map, feeling the strangeness of the moment. A lifetime of rules broken in a church parking lot at 1 in the morning. His father would have disowned him. His younger self would have called it betrayal. But his younger self hadn't known that the deadliest traps were the ones you built yourself. "One more thing," Herrera said as they turned to leave. "The boy who drew this, he's safe?" "He's under my protection. Keep it that way. When this is over, I'll want to talk to him." "When this is over," Rico said quietly, "he's going to need a lot more than talking." He drove back to his estate as dawn approached, the city beginning to stir. In a few hours, he would follow his old routine one final time, driving into a trap everyone knew was coming. The ritual would be complete, not as protection, but as weapon. Messina thought he understood predictability. Tomorrow, he'd learn the difference between pattern and plan. Rico stood in his garage at 6:30 a.m., dressed in the same charcoal suit he'd worn yesterday, performing a ritual that now felt like theater. The difference was that this time, he understood he was acting. The audience, Messina's watchers, whoever they were, expected a performance, and he would give them exactly what they'd paid to see. The decoy Mercedes sat in the exact position his regular car had occupied. Angled 30 degrees from the entrance, driver's side facing the reinforced door. Vincent Caruso had worked through the night switching the vehicles, ensuring every detail was perfect. Same model, same year, same license plate, borrowed from Rico's backup car and carefully transferred. To any observer, even one studying the vehicle closely, It would appear identical to the car that had been sitting there for months. The real genius was invisible. Vincent had installed a sophisticated tracking jammer in the decoy's trunk, powerful enough to disrupt GPS signals in a 50-foot radius. He'd also replaced the standard door handle mechanism with one that included a remote receiver calibrated to activate only on Rico's command. When Messina's people sent their signal to trigger the kill switch, they'd get confirmation that the device had worked. The car would die exactly as planned. Except Rico wouldn't be inside. "Checkpoint 1, Rico murmured, beginning the performance. He touched his left jacket pocket. Phone. Right pocket. Glasses case. Breast pocket. Tapped twice. Handkerchief. Behind him, Marco and 2 other guards stood at their prescribed distances, playing their roles in a dance they'd performed hundreds of times. The difference was that today, everyone was armed with considerably more firepower than usual, concealed beneath their suits. Rico began his 7 steps toward the vehicle. As he walked, he thought about all the times he'd performed this same ritual, believing in its protective power. How many mornings had he counted these steps, convinced that precision equaled safety? The superstition seemed absurd now, embarrassing. But Messina had believed in it, had counted on it, and that belief would be his undoing. 1. Rico's shoe clicked against concrete. 2. Somewhere out there, in an apartment or a parked car, or a building with a view of his estate, someone was watching. 3. They'd be seeing what they expected, the predictable boss, following his unbreakable routine. 4. They'd be sending confirmation to Messina, the target is moving. 5. They'd be checking their equipment one final time, ensuring the kill switch was ready. 6. They'd be savoring their anticipation, already counting their payment. 7. Rico reached for the door handle, paused for his customary final inspection of the vehicle's perimeter, then pulled it open. He slid into the back seat, right side, exactly as he'd done 1,000 times before. Marco closed the door behind him with the precise firmness Rico had always insisted upon, not slammed, but securely shut. His driver, Antonio, sat behind the wheel. The man had been with Rico for 12 years, had driven him through snowstorms and threats and late-night emergencies. His hands were steady on the wheel, but Rico could see tension in his shoulders. "Nervous?" Rico asked quietly. "Terrified, boss, but I trust the plan. Makes one of us." Antonio started the engine. The Mercedes purred to life, its dashboard glowing in the dim garage light. Everything appeared normal. Everything felt wrong. They pulled out of the garage at precisely 6:47 a.m., 3 minutes ahead of schedule, exactly as Rico always did. The morning air was cool, the sky just beginning to lighten toward dawn. Traffic would be building on the interstate, the early commuters already grinding toward their own rituals. As they drove through the estate's gates, Rico caught a glimpse of movement in a parked sedan half a block down. Just a shadow, a shift of weight, but enough to confirm what he'd suspected. They were being watched. The performance had an audience. "They've seen us," Antonio said, checking his mirrors. "Good, let them see." The drive toward the interstate took 12 minutes through residential streets Rico had memorized years ago. He forced himself not to look over his shoulder, not to scan for surveillance. The old Rico would have been oblivious, confident in his routine's protection. That's who he needed to be now. They merged onto Interstate 95, settling into the express lanes. Traffic was moderate, enough cars to provide cover, but not so many that their pace would be disrupted. Rico checked his watch, 7:03 a.m., right on schedule. The Bridgewater overpass was approximately 8 minutes ahead. His phone buzzed, a text from Marco, traveling in a separate vehicle 2 miles behind. "Package delivered, ghost in position." Rico allowed himself a small smile. The package was his actual self, or rather, the armored SUV carrying the real Rico Antonelli, traveling a parallel route with a full security detail. The ghost was the decoy, the performance, the ritual-made weapon. Another buzz, this one from Lieutenant Herrera. "Assets deployed. Green light confirmed." That meant state police sharpshooters were positioned on the overpass, tactical teams were standing by, and every angle would be covered. It meant that if something went catastrophically wrong, there was backup. It also meant Rico had crossed a line he could never uncross, had broken a rule so fundamental that even calling it a betrayal felt inadequate. But Sal Benedetti was dead because he'd tried to save Rico's life. That had to mean something. That had to count for more than tradition. "Boss," Antonio said quietly. 5 minutes to the overpass. Through the windshield, Rico could see the bridge rising ahead, a concrete ribbon suspended above the churning traffic below. Somewhere up there, in a gray van with fake company logos, Messina's team was watching, waiting. They'd see the Mercedes approaching. They'd verify the license plate, confirm the timing, check every detail against their surveillance notes, and then they'd press a button, sending a signal that would kill the car's electrical system and lock its doors, trapping what they believed was their target inside a luxury coffin. Rico leaned back against the leather seat, feeling strangely calm. Yesterday, this car had represented his near death. Today, it was bait. Tomorrow, if everything went according to plan, it would be evidence in a criminal trial. The wheel of fortune turned. The ritual transformed. And somewhere in his estate, Caleb was hopefully still sleeping, dreaming of a world where fathers didn't die for their mistakes and 10-year-olds didn't draw maps of murder in crayon. 3 minutes, Antonio said. Rico closed his eyes, counting his heartbeat, and waited for the trap to spring. Rico watched from a borrowed office on the 14th floor of a medical building, half a mile from the Bridgewater overpass. The room belonged to a dentist who'd been persuaded to take an unexpected vacation day. Through a high-powered scope mounted on a tripod, Rico had a clear view of the bridge, the gray surveillance van, and the stretch of highway where his decoy Mercedes was about to die. Lieutenant Herrera stood beside him, speaking quietly into her radio. "All units, target vehicle approaching, 60 seconds. Marco was positioned at the window to Rico's left, watching through binoculars. Vincent Caruso sat at a laptop connected to the decoy's systems, monitoring its telemetry in real time. The room smelled of antiseptic and coffee. 4 state police officers occupied the corners, their presence a reminder of the strange alliance holding this operation together. Through the scope, Rico could see Antonio behind the wheel of the Mercedes, his face a mask of concentration. The car moved at exactly 63 miles per hour, maintaining the right lane as it always did, approaching the overpass with mechanical precision. 30 seconds, Herrera said. Rico's phone buzzed. A text from Antonio. "I see the van, still committed?" Rico typed back. "Drive through, no hesitation." The Mercedes climbed the gentle incline toward the overpass. Through the scope, Rico could see the gray van parked on the shoulder, its side panel bearing the fake Metro Cable logo that Caleb had carefully reproduced in crayon. 2 men were visible in the front seats, watching the approaching vehicle. 20 seconds. Vincent's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Their signal is active. They're already transmitting, waiting for the right moment to..." The Mercedes jerked suddenly, its brake lights flashing. The engine died. Even from half a mile away, through the scope's magnification, Rico could see Antonio struggling with the wheel as the power steering failed. The car coasted another 30 feet before coming to rest directly in the kill zone Caleb had marked on his map. "Signal activated," Vincent confirmed. "Car's dead. Doors are locked. They took the bait." For a moment, nothing happened. The Mercedes sat motionless on the overpass while traffic flowed around it. Antonio was trapped inside, playing his role perfectly, a confused driver trying to understand why his vehicle had suddenly died. Then the van's side door slid open. 3 men emerged, moving with military precision. They wore dark jackets and baseball caps, hands hidden. Rico recognized the formation, a tactical approach. 1 man covering while 2 advanced, professional, efficient, exactly what Messina would have paid for. "State units, hold position," Herrera ordered into her radio. "Let them commit." The 2 advancing men were 20 feet from the Mercedes when Rico saw what they were carrying. Not pistols for a quick execution. Submachine guns. Compact, probably MP5s or similar, The kind of weapons that turned a car into a shredder, that left no doubt about the message being sent. Jesus, Marco whispered. They're not just killing him, they're making a statement. The lead man reached the Mercedes. He pointed his weapon at the driver's side window. Rico could see Antonio's silhouette inside, hands visible, playing terrified. The man shouted something, probably ordering Antonio to unlock the doors, a sadistic touch before the slaughter. Then 3 more vehicles arrived. They came fast, 2 black SUVs and a panel van, screeching to a halt in a triangle around the disabled Mercedes. Doors flew open and men poured out, at least 8 of them, all armed with similar weapons. They wore different jackets than Messina's crew, but the violence in their movement was identical. What the hell? Herrera spun toward Rico. Who are they? Rico felt ice flood his veins. Through the scope, he recognized the lead man from the new arrivals, Johnny Torino, enforcer for the Castellano family, Rico's rivals, his competition, his enemies. It's not just Messina, Rico said, his voice hollow. This is a territorial play. Castellano is moving on my organization. On the overpass, everything happened at once. Torino's crew opened fire on Messina's men. The 2 groups had apparently arrived for the same execution, neither expecting the other. The result was chaos, muzzle flashes, men diving for cover, the windows of the Mercedes exploding inward as crossfire raked across the vehicle. Antonio was still inside. "Move in!" Herrera barked into her radio. "All units, move in now!" But Rico was already running for the door, Marco at his heels. The plan had accounted for Messina's ambush. It had prepared for a clean state police intervention. It hadn't anticipated a 3-way firefight with his driver trapped in the middle. Behind him, he heard Vincent shouting, "The car's armor will hold! The car's armor!" The explosion cut off his words. Through the office window, Rico saw the fireball bloom on the overpass. The Mercedes didn't just burn, it erupted. A column of flame and black smoke that punched into the morning sky. Someone had used something more than bullets. A grenade, maybe. Or an explosive charge. The shockwave shattered windows in the medical building. Car alarms began shrieking across the parking lot below. On the overpass, both groups of gunmen were running, scattering like roaches as state police vehicles converged from both directions. Rico stood frozen in the doorway, watching smoke pour from what had been his decoy car. Antonio had been inside. Antonio, who'd driven him for 12 years, who'd trusted the plan, who'd said he was terrified but believed in Rico's strategy. "Units in pursuit," Herrera was saying, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Repeat, suspects fleeing on foot. We need ambulance and fire response." "There won't be anything for the ambulance," Rico said quietly. Herrera turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw the calculation happening. The realization that Rico's gambit had just killed one of his own people and unleashed a gang war on a public highway in morning rush hour. "This doesn't change anything," she said. "We stay with the plan." The plan just burned to death on the interstate. No, the plan just got more complicated. Herrera moved closer, lowering her voice so her officers couldn't hear. "Messina's people are running. Castellano's people are running. Both groups just committed attempted murder and about 15 other felonies on camera. We can still use this." Rico wanted to argue, wanted to rage at the universe for turning his trap into catastrophe. But beneath the shock, a colder part of his mind was already working. Herrera was right. The explosion changed the tactics, but not the objective. Messina and Castellano had both shown their hands, both had committed to killing him in the most public way possible. That meant both families were vulnerable now, exposed, desperate. "What do you need from me?" Rico asked. Herrera looked at him for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. "I need you to do what you do best, Mr. Antonelli. I need you to be predictable one more time." On the overpass, the Mercedes burned like a pyre, sending smoke signals that would be visible for miles. And somewhere in the city, Sal Messina was about to learn that killing Rico Antonelli required more than knowing his patterns. It required understanding the difference between ritual and revenge, The warehouse in Red Hook smelled of rot and stale water. Rico walked through the darkness with Marco and 2 state police detectives flanking him, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom like accusations. Lieutenant Herrera had given him 30 minutes, time enough to have the conversation that needed to happen before lawyers and prosecutors turned it into theater. They found Sal Messina in a back office, watching news coverage of the overpass inferno on a laptop. He looked up as they entered, and Rico saw the exact moment comprehension replaced confusion on his face. Messina had been expecting triumph. Instead, he was looking at a ghost. "You're dead," Messina said stupidly. "I watched you burn." "You watched my driver burn." Rico pulled out a chair and sat across from him, ignoring the detective's protests. "Antonio Greco, 12 years of loyal service, survived 3 attempts on my life, died this morning because you couldn't be content with skimming off the top." Messina's face had gone pale. His hand trembled as he closed the laptop. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't." Rico's voice was soft but absolute. "We're past that now. State police have footage of your men on the overpass. They've already picked up 2 of them. By noon, you'll be facing murder 1, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges that'll keep you in prison until you're too old to remember your own name." "Then why are you here? To gloat?" Rico reached into his jacket and pulled out Caleb's crayon drawing. Now worn from handling, he spread it on the desk between them. "A 10-year-old boy drew this. His name is Caleb Benedetti." The color drained completely from Messina's face. "You remember Sal Benedetti, don't you? My former consigliere, the man you recruited to help plan my assassination." Rico tapped the drawing. "Benedetti realized what you were doing, realized you were using him to get close to me, to learn my patterns. So he sent his son to warn me." "That's not—" "He made the boy memorize everything, the device on my car, the surveillance van." Rico pointed to the gray rectangle Caleb had drawn with such care. "Even the fake company name you painted on the side, Metro Cable, a 10-year-old drew that from memory the night his father was murdered." Messina stared at the drawing like it was a venomous snake. "Sal told his kid?" "He did more than tell him. He made sure Caleb could save my life after he was gone." Rico leaned forward. "Do you understand what that means? Sal Benedetti, the man I exiled, the man I'd written off as a thief and a traitor, spent his final hours protecting me, and you spent yours trying to kill me. He stole from you. He borrowed money without asking, called it a loan against future earnings. Was he wrong? Yes. Did it warrant exile? Maybe. Did it warrant using him as a puppet and then murdering him when he grew a conscience?" Rico's voice hardened. "That's on you." Messina's hand moved toward his jacket. Marco's gun was out before he'd moved an inch, pressed against the base of Messina's skull. "Don't," Marco said quietly. Rico held up his hand. "Let him. Go ahead, Sal. Pull whatever you're reaching for." "Give Marco a reason." Messina's hand stopped. Slowly he withdrew it, empty. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand how completely you've lost." Rico picked up the crayon drawing. "You studied my patterns. You learned my routines. You turned my predictability into a weapon. It was a good plan. It should have worked. Then how? Because you forgot that patterns aren't the same as people. You counted on me being a superstitious old man trapped in his rituals. But Caleb broke through that. His father's sacrifice broke through that. They reminded me that the only thing that ever really protected me was loyalty, both giving it and receiving it." Rico stood, looking down at Messina with something close to pity. "You knew my schedule. You knew my route. You knew everything about my routine. But you didn't know I'd call the state police. You didn't know I'd set up a decoy. You didn't know that while you were watching one car, I was in another, watching you." "The Castellanos," Messina said suddenly, desperately. "They showed up. They weren't supposed to be there. That wasn't me." "I know. That's the only reason you're still breathing." Rico moved toward the door. "The Castellanos made their move because they thought I'd be vulnerable, thought my organization would fracture after my death. They were wrong, and now both families have exposed themselves on camera in broad daylight, committing acts of war." He paused at the threshold. The state police will prosecute you for Antonio's murder. The courts will put you away. But before they do, I want you to know something. Rico held up the crayon drawing one last time. This piece of paper, drawn by a child who lost his father because of your ambition, this is what beat you. Not my money, not my soldiers, not my connections. A boy with a crayon. Messina slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. What happens to the kid? He's under my protection. He'll grow up safe, educated, away from all of this. Rico folded the drawing carefully. He'll have the childhood his father died to give him. That's the deal I made with Sal Benedetti's ghost. Lieutenant Herrera appeared in the doorway. Time's up, Mr. Antonelli. We need to process him. Rico nodded and stepped aside as the detectives moved in, reading Messina his rights in voices made mechanical by repetition. As they led him away in handcuffs, Messina looked back once, his face a study in disbelief. How? He asked. How did you know you could trust the cops? Rico thought of Antonio, burning on the overpass, of Sal Benedetti, killed for trying to do the right thing, of Caleb drawing maps in crayon because his father had asked him to memorize murder. I didn't, Rico said quietly, but I learned something this week. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is the thing nobody expects, including yourself. Outside, dawn was turning into morning. The city would be learning about the overpass shootout, about the gang war erupting in rush hour traffic. The news would call it chaos, random violence, the inevitable result of criminals operating without oversight. They'd be wrong. This wasn't chaos. This was what happened when patterns broke, when rituals failed. When a man realized that safety was never about controlling the universe, it was about trusting the right people at the right time. Rico climbed into the back of his armored SUV, Marco sliding in beside him. Through the tinted windows, he watched the warehouse recede into the distance. Where to, boss? Marco asked. Home, Rico said. Caleb will be waking up soon. He shouldn't be alone. The SUV pulled into traffic, taking a route chosen at random, breaking every pattern Rico had spent 40 years establishing. And for the first time in decades, he felt something that might have been peace. The ritual was dead, but Rico Antonelli was still alive, and that, finally, was enough. Rico found Caleb in the estate's library, 3 days after the overpass, sitting in an oversized leather chair with a book he wasn't reading. The boy looked smaller than he had that first morning, as if grief were eating him from the inside. His mother, Elena Benedetti, sat nearby, her own book equally ignored. She'd arrived the day after Messina's arrest, summoned by Rico's people with the kind of gentle insistence that left no room for refusal. May I? Rico gestured to the chair across from them. Elena nodded, her eyes guarded. She was younger than Rico had expected, maybe 40, with Caleb's same dark hair and cautious intelligence. She'd been a nurse before Sal's choices had dragged her into this world. Now she was a widow, trying to protect a son who'd already seen too much. Rico sat and was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I've made arrangements, he finally said. A trust fund in Caleb's name, education expenses, living expenses, whatever he needs through college and beyond, managed by a law firm with no connection to my organization. Blood money, Elena said flatly. Yes, but your husband bled for it, which gives you more right to it than most. Rico met her eyes. You can refuse. You can walk away right now. But I'd ask you not to, not because I need the gesture, but because Caleb deserves better than struggling while his father's sacrifice enriches only me. Elena was quiet, her jaw tight. Finally. How much? Enough that you'll never work unless you want to. Enough that Caleb can choose his own future without money being the deciding factor. Rico leaned forward. There's more. New identities if you want them. Relocation anywhere in the country. Security protocols that will keep you invisible to anyone looking. You're giving us witness protection without the witnesses. I'm giving you what your husband tried to build, a life outside all of this. The choice to be ordinary. Rico glanced at Caleb, who was listening intently despite his apparent focus on the book. He broke my rules to give you that choice. The least I can do is make sure it sticks. And if we stay here, in New York, then the protection stays with you. Different name, different neighborhood, but the same city if that's what you want. Rico pulled out an envelope and set it on the table between them. It's all detailed in here. Account numbers, contact information for the lawyers, options for relocation. Take your time. Decide what's right for your family. Elena didn't reach for the envelope. Why are you doing this? Because I owe your husband a debt I can't repay. Because his son saved my life. And because... Rico hesitated, feeling the weight of the admission. Because I need to remember that this world runs on more than fear and routine. Your husband understood that. I'm still learning. He stood to leave, but Caleb's voice stopped him. What happens to us? I mean, really? Rico turned back. The boy was looking at him now, the book forgotten. His eyes held that same ancient quality Rico had noticed in the garage. Too old, too knowing, shaped by loss into something harder than childhood should produce. Really? You disappear. You become people I used to know, names I barely remember. In 5 years, maybe less, you'll be boring suburban strangers, living boring suburban lives. Rico smiled slightly. It's the best gift I can give you. And you? Caleb asked. What happens to you? The question surprised Rico. He thought about the past 3 days, the meetings with his captains, the complete overhaul of his security protocols, the systematic destruction of every routine he'd built over 40 years. He thought about Lieutenant Herrera's carefully worded agreement, the arrangement that gave state police a window into his operations in exchange for their cooperation. He thought about Antonio's funeral, about standing over a closed casket and making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. I learned to live differently, Rico said. Your father told you the ritual isn't what keeps you safe. The people are. I'm trying to understand what that means. Does it mean trusting people? Sometimes. But more than that, it means trusting yourself. Trusting your instincts even when they break your own rules. Rico moved toward the door, then paused. Your father's last act was pure instinct. No ritual, no pattern, just a father making an impossible choice to save his son and settle a debt. That instinct was worth more than 40 years of my superstitions. He left them there, mother and son, surrounded by books and the promise of a future that didn't include him. Marco was waiting in the hallway, tablet in hand. The new security protocols, Marco said. The team wants to know when they go into effect. They're already in effect. As of this morning, every schedule is variable. Every route is randomized. Every checkpoint is at my discretion, not a clock's. Rico took the tablet and scrolled through the document Marco had prepared. And Marco? Add one more thing. Final item. Separate from the rest. What's that? If something feels wrong, if your gut says abort, if your instinct says run, you act on it immediately. No questions, no protocols, no waiting for authorization. Instinct is the final defense system. Make sure everyone understands that. Marco raised an eyebrow. That's the opposite of everything we've built. Everything we built almost got me killed. Time to try something that works. Rico handed back the tablet. Schedule a meeting with all the captains. Tomorrow, variable time, location to be determined an hour before. Tell them we're implementing a new doctrine. What do I call it? Rico thought of Caleb's crayon drawing, of Sal Benedetti's last desperate act, of a 10-year-old boy screaming in a garage because something felt catastrophically wrong. Call it the Benedetti Protocol, in honor of the man who saved my life by breaking every rule. That evening, Rico stood alone in his study, looking at the crayon drawing now framed on his wall. It hung between a Modigliani and a signed Hemingway letter, completely out of place and utterly perfect. The crude lines and childish colors reminded him daily of what mattered, not the performance of safety, but the reality of trust. His phone buzzed. A text from Herrera. Messina arraigned, Castellano crew picked up, 8 felonies each. Nice doing business with you. Rico smiled and deleted the message. Their arrangement wouldn't last. Couldn't last. But for now, it served both their purposes. She got convictions. He got breathing room. And somewhere in the middle, there was space for something that almost resembled justice. He poured himself a whiskey and settled into his chair, not bothering to check the time. His flight to Chicago had been rescheduled for whenever he felt like going. His meeting with the commission was set for sometime next week. His dinner reservation was flexible. For a man who'd spent 40 years enslaved to schedules, the freedom felt both terrifying and intoxicating. A knock at the door. Marco entered without waiting for permission, another new protocol. Caleb and his mother want to see you before they leave. They're heading to the lawyer's office to start the paperwork. Rico nodded and stood, straightening his jacket out of habit. As he walked toward the door, he caught sight of himself in the antique mirror. A 63-year-old man, trying to learn new patterns after a lifetime of rigid ones. "Boss," Marco said, "you think this new system will work?" "I think Antonio is dead because the old system failed. I think Sal Benedetti is dead because he challenged my superstitions." Rico turned from the mirror. "I think a 10-year-old boy with a crayon understood something I spent 40 years ignoring." "Which is?" "That safety isn't something you perform. It's something you earn every day by paying attention to the people around you and trusting your gut when something feels wrong." Rico smiled slightly. Especially if, trusting your gut means breaking your own rules. They walked together through the marble halls, past the expensive art and imported furniture, toward the library where a widow and her son were preparing to disappear into ordinary life. Enrico Antonelli, the most powerful boss in the city, felt lighter than he had in decades. The ritual was dead. Long live instinct.